I kind of feel like the wake up call has only really just begun for Australia, and I think the populace has started to realise it, but maybe our political figures quite haven't realised the importance of it just yet either.
Hello and welcome to The Focus. Today we're joined by Mel Pikos. Mel is the host of Talking Tactics, a defence-focused platform breaking down military capability, force structure and strategy in clear, accessible terms. With a sharp analytical eye and a reputation for candid assessments of platforms, procurement and readiness, Mel has built a following for translating complex defence issues into practical, no-nonsense conversations. His work bridges enthusiast insight with serious strategic commentary, making him a distinctive voice in Australia's contemporary defence discussion. Mel, welcome to The Focus.
Thanks very much, John. Much appreciated. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thank you. Mel, in a recent episode of Talking Tactics, you graded the Royal Australian Navy's qualitative strengths. You rated the Hobart-class destroyers and the MH-60 Romeo helicopters as A tier, the Canberra-class landing helicopter docks and Collins-class submarines as B tier, and much of the remaining fleet as C tier or below. You described the Royal Australian Navy as a navy in transition, and that's a fair point. But today I want to widen this because the issue isn't just about the Navy. The issue is whether the Australian Defence Force as a whole is structurally ready for sustained high-end competition. Deterrence isn't naval alone, it's joint service. So the question becomes, are we building an integrated warfighting system or acquiring exquisite platforms without depth?
Look, I would quite generally say it probably comes back to the broader question, are we spending enough on our Defence Force? And I'd say that obviously the short answer is no. When we start looking at some high cost acquisitions, things like the AUKUS nuclear subs, they obviously take a big chunk of that budget and it kind of just starts taking away from other things that we should be investing in. And I feel like there's a general reluctance from the Albanese government to go in there and really hike up defence spending. There's quite a lot of other priorities at the moment. When you look at platform or at least programs like the NDIS, which is really ballooning out massively. It's making it very hard to divert much needed funds to protecting Australia. And quite generally, I think that a lot of programs are therefore slipping through the cracks. Really, what should we be trying to leverage? I would say particularly our relationship with the US to try and effectively be their forward base in Asia Pacific, which I think we're starting to do, and people are starting to wake up to the fact that hey, maybe we do need to start looking at some of these programs that help the United States project power into our region. So I think some things are being done right, but overall, I would probably give us a C plus at best.
Wow, well, that's a bit of a damning indictment, I've got to say. But I do get where you're coming from, believe me. But of course, what you've just said also comes to the very heart of defence and having a defence force, and that's sovereignty. I
Mm.
mean, are the many years of governments kind of treating defence as the kid down the street, as opposed to a pressing priority? Have successive Australian governments effectively thrown sovereignty out the window now because we have no other option but double down on our American ties and effectively let them garrison our country because the ADF as a whole is just not capable enough of securing the continent?
Look, I think there has been quite generally a decade of neglect, and we've probably taken it for granted. And I think it really does stem from a lot of people forget, but when Tony Abbott was Prime Minister, Xi Jinping came to Canberra and he presented to Parliament in 2014 And he said by the middle of the century, China will be a democracy.
Yeah.
We fell for it hook, line, and sinker.
Mm,
We took him at face value. We took the foot off the accelerator and we didn't spend what we needed to do. And structurally, that has weakened our spending. And quite frankly, it's taken us quite a few years to wake up to the fact that, oh, hang on a minute. China's just gone and built this massive, massive blue water navy in the background,
yeah. Yeah.
all while saying that we're don't worry, we're non-threatening, we're the type of administration that doesn't want to annex neighboring countries, and we're very friendly pandas. And then, by surprise, we've woken up. We've finally woken up, and I think really it's been Donald Trump that has called to arms the rest of the world and said, "Hang on a minute, this what is being said and the actions don't marry up." So we were
Mm,
lulled into a false sense of security, really, from that point onwards. So I can understand why successive governments took the stance of, well, maybe defence isn't the highest priority. We're in a peaceful environment. We're very far removed from where there's conflict in the world. We had that mindset of the war on terror still for a long time, and
mm,
quite simply, a lot of it turned when Russia invaded Ukraine, which I believe is what 4 years now this month.
yeah. Yeah.
So it's a big ship to turn to all of a sudden say, hang on a minute, we were spending in the high 1% of GDP. A lot of Western European nations are now upping it to 4 or 5% of GDP.
Mm,
America, I think, is somewhere around 3%, and we've, I guess, had an administration that has wanted to bury its head in the sand as to the realities of geopolitics at the moment. And I kind of feel like the wake up call has only really just begun for Australia. And I think the populace has started to realise it, but maybe our political figures quite haven't realised the importance of it just yet either. It'd be important for you and I to talk about it so we
yep.
can make people aware that, hang on a minute, these guys need some more money so we can
Mm,
get what we need.
yeah, exactly. Look, turning to the politicians and the political equation, politicians love to rope out the uniformed people and talk tough about defense, but they never seem to be able to follow up. And, complicating the matter further for Australia is our economy is basically stuck in China's orbit. We had some, trade war issues during the whole COVID Morrison period, but again, the one single line of trade that is untouchable by any Australian government is iron ore shipments to China. The very iron ore that's being milled and refined and, helps create the massive military modernization program that we're seeing right now. Um, how do you square this? Because I mean, I've seen all sorts of bureaucratic conniptions coming out of Canberra saying, "Oh, look, we can sit in the middle. We're leveraging here. We're hedging there. We're really sophisticated. We're very good. We've got statecraft all over us." And I don't know about you, but when I look at the way that we handle ourselves, it does look like a two-bob job. Flick the coin, see what happens. I don't think defense should be that. I think defense should be far firmer, grounded, especially politically, because neither Liberal nor Labor have come up with anything that gives me, perhaps even you, certainly a lot of our listeners, the confidence necessary that we know what we're doing. I was going to say a bad word then, Mel, but anyway.
Well, unfortunately, I think we can keep blaming politicians, which they're responsible for a lot of the bad decisions that have been happening. But I
Mm,
also think that really politicians are responding to what wins votes, and I just don't feel like the Australian public is educated enough as to what the threats
yeah.
are to Australia, and therefore it's not really a big voter issue. It doesn't poll very highly as to what are concerning to the everyday average Australian. We probably are just in general not educated enough because we've been so peaceful for so long, everyone's just been lulled into a false sense of security. Things
Mm.
like iron ore, obviously, it's immensely important for Australia. Rio Tinto has just opened up a big mine in Africa, which I believe their third
Mm.
shipment has gone to China. That
Yep.
presents as a strategic risk for us. I'm not a big advocate for decoupling from China personally. I think that the more you decouple from a country like China economically, the higher the probability that there is a reason to um, uh, have a war. If you think about the strategic reality of what China requires, something like 80 to 90% of all of their energy is imported, and a similar quantum of a percentage of food is imported. Heavily reliant on countries like Australia, they're effectively a trading nation. Um, Hence why we've made such a big investment in the AUKUS submarines, because some of the key shipping lanes, like the Sunda and the Malacca Strait, we can effectively park an AUKUS nuclear powered sub at each of those points, send them up from Stirling in WA, hugely important strategic value for both US and us to be able to effectively cut off their trade. If I think about an environment where we've said, no, we want to decouple from China, we don't want to sell them anything, we don't want to sell them food, we don't want to sell them resources, because invariably that's funneling into their war machine. Well,
Mm.
I would also say then we also have power to be able to cut them off in the
Mm.
event of a conflict,
Mm.
if they are reliant on us. So I don't feel that cutting a nation off is the right strategy. Perhaps becoming more independent in stuff that would be seen as critical minerals and stuff, which is obviously a strong posture that President Trump has taken, and disallowing them, not being the sole arbiter of critical minerals that go into missiles and stuff like that. There's going to be specific um, critical minerals that we at least need to have a hedge and shoring up our own supply, which I think the Chinese have done very well. And similar to a lot of things over the last decade, we've probably been quite complacent in not really understanding global supply chains enough, and just saying, yep, we just want to keep trading with everyone. Well, some things we need to keep a sovereign capacity for. The government last year, both predominantly led by the South Australian state government, and of course supported by Albanese, bailing out the Whyalla Steelworks,
Mm.
supplies something like 70% of the steel for, I believe it's rail and road infrastructure in Australia. I mean, those are definitely the things that we should be bailing out, and keeping a sovereign capacity for, because we can't be completely reliant on importing everything from China. There needs to be a selection of key inputs into our economy that I think we do need to be reliant on, and pay a higher premium for it and have it manufactured here in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have to ask you this question, Mel. I mean, um, Trump. I was listening to a podcast this morning, and the people were saying that the world is obsessed by Trump. My theory is that Trump is obsessed by Trump, but that's another story. But there's been a lot of arguments in the IR circle suggesting that Trump is basically spitballing his way into international relations. He's got no plan. There's no coherence to anything that he does. But as much as I would like to say I agree with that because Trump just rubs me up the wrong way, I'm starting to see a plan, and it's it seems like yes, China is being pushed back. It's being pushed back out of Venezuela. Allegedly, as soon as this coming weekend, it might be pushed out of Iran.
Mm,
I'm starting to see something come forward that looks and feels like a coherent plan that is China centric. What are your
mm.
views?
I would start by saying I'm not the biggest Trump fan, but I'm also not the biggest Trump hater.
Yeah.
My view on politics is you've got to assess each decision in isolation and
Mm.
make your own judgment call as to whether or not that is fair and reasonable or completely absurd. Now, there's quite a number of things that Trump does that annoy me, but I would say overwhelmingly, I think there's probably a lot more things that I'm liking about what President Trump is doing. Um, Specifically, I do think that there is at least a broad architecture of a plan where it's chaotic day to day, but there is a general direction as to where it's heading. Quite
Yeah.
clearly, he said to the Europeans, step up and take over the support of Ukraine. We will be there in the background to support you, but it's a European theater and you need to support uh, where required. Everyone, of course, has massively stepped up, and everyone said no. Trump's at the time pulling out and leaving Ukraine to fall. Um, I don't think that that was the case. I think he was trying to withdraw strategically in order to allow some clear air for him to reorientate into the Asia Pacific region and focus more on what Xi Jinping and China are doing and trying to avert a crisis in Taiwan. He's had a few curveballs, namely, I would say Iran. Obviously, there's been a huge military buildup from the US forces in Iran at this stage. Is it completely to the T his plan? Probably not. I think he would rather focus more wholly and specifically on China, but he is also dismantling allies, places like Venezuela as well, and of course Iran, who and Russia, who all supply oil to China. So I think if you're thinking about this as a chessboard, he's definitely moving pieces and all the pieces at his disposal to structurally weaken China. I think it would be extremely hard for China to launch an all-out invasion on Taiwan without shoring up these critical supply lines for oil. Quite simply, you can't do a naval blockade without extreme access or secure access to oil. China's been obviously trying to build pipelines through places like Pakistan and whatnot, um, simply hasn't achieved what Xi Jinping would like to achieve. That's not to say that he couldn't get there in, a decade or two's time, but I feel like that if it wasn't someone like Trump who's come in and taken a critical lens to um, all of these different aspects, really, I think we would have seen an eventual takeover of Taiwan, and that was certainly my concern probably prior to Trump coming in. And the longer he has been in power, the less and less likely I feel like China would launch an invasion of Taiwan, which would be hugely destabilizing for you and I here in Australia, and of
Mm.
course the Australian populace. We want to do everything that we can do to help prevent that from happening, because it would certainly disrupt significantly our way of life.
Wouldn't it also be a case of if China is seeing what we're talking about as a real and impending threat to them, they're being rolled back. At what point do you think, especially following on from Xi Jinping's latest purge of the Chinese Central Military Commission, um, what do you think in terms of his ability then to steer the ship forward? Because he's really faced with a situation where if he doesn't use what he has to achieve Chinese aims in the short run, he's probably going to lose any advantage in the medium to long term if the US pressure keeps on in this particular trajectory. Is that not a danger as well? Is that, we're kind of hastening China to move fast, kind of like the Japanese did, at the start of World War II. The US cut off petrol supplies. It was an existential threat to the Japanese leadership. And then they thought, well, bugger it, we'll grab what we can from Asia, and that'll be the end. Are we seeing something like that develop?
I think it's always hard to predict how a dictator thinks, particularly when they've been in power for so long. And typically, I mean, if I'm sure you're a student of history and seen the longer a dictator's in power, the crazier they tend to get.
Yes.
And there has obviously been a systematic purging of any anyone that could effectively challenge Xi Jinping. And I guess the various bits of analysis that I've seen is that he's effectively surrounded himself with yes men. I guess we
Yeah.
could take the purging of the recent two generals as two ways. One, apparently he was a bit of an obstacle in saying we can't take Taiwan. We just simply don't have the sustainment or the force to be able to invade an island nation. We've all seen how hard it is for a country like Russia to invade a neighbor over a land border. Obviously, a naval theater would be much harder to implement, particularly somewhere like Taiwan, which is effectively just an island fortress now. But does he put someone in there that is a yes man and says, "Yeah, we can do it. Where that's going to be
Yeah.
easy," and telling him what he effectively wants to hear. He's Xi Jinping's not a general. He's not a military strategist. He's a career politician. It's such a
Yeah.
hard one to try and guess what he's thinking.
Yeah.
He's obviously threatened by those around him that assemble any form of power. I could only say that if you continue to remove people of skill and competence, that naturally you can see what happens. That generally leads to catastrophic failure. So I'm probably in more of the camp of saying if he does make a massive strategic blunder, well, he's doing it surrounded by people who are just telling him what he wants to hear, which I would say is a higher degree of probability that they're going to stuff it up.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with you. Okay, let's switch back to Australia. So, from white settlement until World War II, Britain guaranteed our maritime security. After 1945, the United States assumed that role. Meanwhile, our national mythology from Federation to 1901 onwards was essentially land focused Gallipoli, Kokoda, Tobruk. But the country's geography was and always has been that of an island continent. We are a maritime trading state. So last year, when the People's Liberation Army Navy conducted live fire drills in the Tasman Sea and circumnavigated Australia, legally, yes, but visibly, there was no overt public display of RAN pushback. That may have been prudent, but it was revealing. Mel, was that restraint strategic maturity, or did it expose force depth limitations? I mean, if deterrence relies on visible credibility, what message did that episode send to the Australian public and beyond?
Look, I'd probably be reluctant to blame the ADF. I would probably be more in the camp of saying that Anthony Albanese called it incorrectly. I've probably got very little doubt that um, it's highly likely he was aware when they were probably coming down from Papua New Guinea that this flotilla was making its way towards Australia. He was probably given advance notice. What do you want to do? He chose to stay silent. And it wasn't obviously until a Virgin pilot radioed in, hang on a minute, there's some
Yeah.
live fire drills some 300 kilometers off the coast of Sydney. Quite clearly, it's a show of intimidation.
Yeah.
Um, my understanding is that the ADF was probably monitoring and probably didn't want to reveal our hand as to what our capabilities and what we would do in the event that China decided to somehow invade Australia. And I think restraint in that sort of circumstance is warranted. We don't want to reveal our hand. We also don't want to. It would have been an intelligence operation on the Chinese side. What can we learn about Australia? And we just didn't want to reveal to them what we are capable of, or at least give them any clues. I think it was really just a political failure. Albanese should have said it, should have came out publicly and should have condemned it for what it was. But He chose for the media to find out and then dealt with it as a consequence of uh, the media cycle really picking it up, which I would say, from my perspective, made me and a lot of Australians concerned that, oh, hang on a minute, these guys are off the coast of Sydney and not even our political leaders have come out and said, hey, this is happening or why this is occurring or condemned it. Really, I would just put it down to poor politics. And he should have been on the front foot. And I think that would have waylaid a lot more concern rather than I travel to Sydney quite frequently, typically once a month. On the plane flight, how many times did I think, Jesus, what happens if these Chinese accidentally fire a stray shell somewhere and hit a
Yeah.
plane and you know take it down? I mean, that would have gone through a lot of people traveling, a lot of people's minds traveling to Sydney. There's that
Mm.
sense of unease, which, of course, that's what China wants. There's a reason why they chose 300 kilometers off the coast of Sydney to undertake this firing drill. It's a show, an act of intimidation.
Do you think the Australian government learnt any lessons from this episode? And when I say government, I'm not just talking about the bureaucracy behind defence, but I'm talking about the political leaders that we have. And I'm also being very non-partisan about this because I see problems on both sides of the aisle, quite frankly, in terms of strategic communication. You know, governments and politicians need to be able to tell the people a story. And I don't mean that in a sarcastic way. They need to be able to narrate events. They need to control events and give this sense that they are not weak, that they are not a pushover. At the same time, they don't want to alarm the people in uniform that, oh my God, we're going to war with China. So there is a fine balancing line that needs to be struck. I just think that we may not have the political maturity for being able to strategically communicate defense related matters to the public, which then leaves the public at the mercy of hyperbole from the media, which then feeds this negative loop that we just think that Australia is incapable of doing anything, which is partly true, but not fully true. But still, it sets that sort of negative agenda, which I think is not going to help Australia, the ADF, or even the politicians moving forward. So my question really is there any evidence that we've actually learnt from last year, or are we just going to continue muddling through the next series of crises whenever the PRC decides to, have a tilt at us?
The short answer is I think we're going to keep muddling through from crisis to crisis because
Mm.
I definitely don't think we have learnt anything. And probably if it happened again, the exact same situation would come. Um, I think the quite clearly what we're trying to manage is our largest trading partner being China. We're unlikely to decouple anytime soon unless our hand was forced, uh, which I think that the general Australian populace would be they would need to be forced to want to stop.
Yeah.
We love buying stuff from China. We love sending stuff to China. We're in I believe it's $100 billion trade surplus with them. So of course they're incredibly important to our economy. What would I do if I was in politics? Of course, I would want to maintain a strong relationship with our trading partner, but by the same token, uh, how do you deter a great power like China? Quite simply, have a credible defence force within Australia that is well funded, because quite clearly, deterrence comes from strength. Uh, if we upped our spending to 3% of GDP, that would be an absolute huge boost to our capabilities and the power we are able to project into our region. Effectively, isn't that how you keep a bully at bay? Know that if they know that there's a right hook ready and waiting to knock them out
Mm.
if they come to us, well, they're not going to fire the first shot.
Yeah.
So I think the solution is quite simple. We can I believe, maintain a strong trading relationship with China, but it can only be a strong trading relationship if we are willing to invest what is required to provide a credible deterrence and have strength through power.
Well, again, that leads to the next thing. And the next thing, of course, is politicians will always turn around and say, we have different spending priorities. Defense isn't one
Yeah.
of them. Look at the NDIS, look at anything that the government puts their hand to. And you think, well, okay, well, obviously we don't have sufficient resources, financial resources in this country to boost defense spending while also keeping all the things that we know and love about the Australian government operational as well. So the politicians will always couch this as you've got a choice, public. You either have a strong defence, but that means you don't get Centrelink, or your
Yeah.
pensions are wound up, or, so it's always given to us as a hard either or situation. Do you think this is a wrong-headed approach by our leadership? Do you think that we can actually afford to up our defence game? And will it come at the cost of other government programs, or does it even have to?
I think it definitely has to come at the cost of other government programs. Quite simply, the government is spending too much. Historically, we have spent something in the order of 23% of GDP to maintain the government. It's sitting up around 26% now, which quite simply, the government has been the single force growing our economy. And I believe if you strip everything back, it's really the NDIS that has been driving the economy, particularly in employment growth. It's been soaking up all the excess labour force available in Australia, which has created huge cost pressures everywhere. Now, what do I think needs to be done? Well, quite simply, the rorts need to stop. NDIS is a massive cash cow for a lot of people rorting the system, mainly companies. I think there'd be need to be a wholesale audit on something programs like the NDIS. It also doesn't help that energy costs are pushing up massively in this country. We had one of the cheapest power prices in all of the developed world. We can't get a new mine site approved in this country. There's too much red tape, too many hurdles. We're simply uninvestable. What our key cornerstone industry is in this country that drives a lot of our prosperity and allows us to have excess cash to be able to spend on things like the Defence Force. Capital, this is the worst place to invest in the world right now. It, it, my business is I get to speak to a lot of companies because we help them with office space. So I get to speak to a lot of CEOs, CFOs, managing directors, managing partners, all people that are titans of industry and growing the economy. You speak to them and say, where's your capital going? No one is looking at opening a new mine site in Australia. That is that that capital is being deployed elsewhere, predominantly America, because the administration over in America is coming at you with open arms and saying, how can we get you an approval within a year? Whereas where there's no certainty, you could be locked up in planning and environment court here for 10 years, and your project doesn't get off the ground because we found a one red-legged frog somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and therefore we can't open this, $20 billion gas plant. It's absolutely ludicrous. It's impacting our energy. It's impacting our exports. Something like 50% of the cost of running a mine site is energy. Why would you spend that money in Australia when you can go somewhere like America where power prices are 40 to 50% cheaper to run those mine sites? You've got less government oversight and regulation in your planning approvals. It's a very pro-business administration, and by contrast, we are anti-business, we are anti-resources, and the flow-on effect is, what is growing the economy, employing carers to look after the elderly. And while that's a noble cause, it doesn't grow the economic pie. And all it does is shrink the economic pie. And therefore, you can't fund things like submarines and warships. It's a long-term structural decline. We do need someone to come in and shake that system up and turn it back on its head and wind the clock back 10 years and go back to what we were. Cheap power, exporting minerals to the rest of the world, and one of the lucky country status. It's a big ship to turn around, and I just don't feel like the current administration has got any appetite whatsoever to make any hard decisions. Something like 50% of Australians now are reliant on the government teat. I think back to Jean-Claude Juncker of the EU, who said, "We know what needs to be done. We just don't know how to get elected after we've done it." And that's that's really the trap we find ourselves in. As soon as you start retracting all these things from people that they're used to getting for free, why would they vote for you?
Well, that's true. Everyone wants to have a comfortable life, but at the end of the day, the system doesn't permit people who will be off the tee to have something of an alternative to that, which is also a problem. And again, it's a political problem that crosses the aisle. No one wants to touch this with a barge pole because for everything that we take away from the people, we must give them something back. And if you can do that, then I think that the message is sellable. But if you say, okay, we're going to scrap Centrelink and we're going to just put that all into AUKUS, or we're going to put that into a whole raft of new acquisitions for the defence forces. And oh, by the way, we're not replacing Centrelink with anything. Yeah, you're going to have a rebellion on your hands. You're going to have to loosen the system up to a point where the economy can take up people who are either underemployed or unemployed. And that way, you at least give them a partly positive message. You simply can't just chop things up because you're right. It's gonna blow back on the politicians.
Yeah.
However, however, let's now turn to our system, our ADF system, the order of battle, if you will. So we all know it's not just about Navy's hull numbers, and it's not just about the numbers of equipment, but there are deeper fundamental issues at stake. For instance, I mean, does the Air Force have sufficient sortie sustainability? Does the Army have the mass and logistics depth necessary for sustained operations? Do we have sufficient munition stocks across all services? Is joint integration real or theoretical? The Army is undergoing restructuring under the National Defence Strategy, pivoting towards littoral manoeuvre and long range strike. The Air Force operates high end platforms like the JSF, Wedgetail, and Growler aircraft, but high end aerial warfare burns through munitions and maintenance cycles
Mm.
very quickly. So, Mel, if Australia faced a prolonged regional contingency, where would strain show first? Naval presence, air sustainment, or land force mass?
Uh, I would say you can only look to a country like Ukraine, which almost immediately ran out of pretty much everything you need, particularly shells and munitions. Um, I I've been a big advocate, and you might have seen on my channel that we should become a missile manufacturing powerhouse. Our geography lends itself to being a secondary supplier to a country like the United States, where we are far from pretty much anywhere else in the world, which does mean that we're outside of strike range from most of the world. If we continued to expand things like being able to produce things like even the Tomahawk missile and other advanced missiles and systems and whatnot. I just think it would be a huge strategic advantage for somewhere like Australia to be that key global provider to other nations. Um, it makes perfect sense, not just from geography's sense, but it also gives us a strategic stake at the table where we become a global player, not just some middle country that people typically forget about at the bottom of the world. Um,
Mm.
we would hold some significant strategic weight if we are supplying other countries and we're effectively that backup store, because invariably, if there was a conflict in Taiwan, we would pretty much fire everything in a very quick succession. And then what do we do then? Wait for America
Sticks and
to ship
stones.
us? You know, we can't be reliant on others in this type of realm, because if we are, well, we're just going to be last in the pecking order. Of course, America's going to look after themselves first. Then where do we get them from? Israel. Well, I'm sure they're going to have their own problems in the event of a conflict. There's particularly one where Australia would be involved, because chances are that would probably mean it's a global conflict. It means everyone is going to be starved, and really, um, who would be great at pumping out absolutely huge volumes of missiles and munitions? Probably China. They've got the industrial capacity to go and do it. They could certainly sustain themselves, and in any sort of war of attrition, we certainly don't have the numbers or the production capacity to be able to help support ourselves. So I'm a big advocate for, let's go spend a couple $1 billion and set these facilities up in Australia. These should be high priority items for the government, because we can keep talking about the next high priced acquisition that's going to be 10 to 15 years away. And that's all well and great to have those in the pipeline, because if we're not talking about them now, then we're never going to get them. But as you've already stated, uh, there's some things that you just need to produce here on home soil and have a sovereign capacity to be able to stay in the fight for longer. Otherwise, we would be trying to rapidly do it in a time when, you know, we're getting particularly or in any kind of conflict, getting attacked. That's not the time when you want to be building these facilities.
Well, I mean, let's stay on the whole topic of defense industry. So, do you consider defense industry the fourth arm of the ADF?
Look, I would say that it's got a couple of pillars. I mean, I think, of course, it's hugely important for the ADF, but I also think it's great for our economy, because you know, if you think about future made in Australia, um, I I buy a lot of stuff from China, particularly office furniture. For There's a lot of government incentives out there to say we should open up a manufacturing facility here in Australia to produce our own office furniture and be less reliant on the government. I can categorically tell you it would probably cost us 5 times the amount of money that it would cost the Chinese to do it, and we would be far less efficient at it. And I'm sure that would be the case for a lot of industries, particularly for consumer goods in Australia. It would just simply be cheaper just to continue to buy it from China. What should we be doing instead? Manufacturing our own defence force capabilities in this country. You employ Australians. Those Australians pay their own taxes. They're typically high paid, intelligent jobs where you've got to go to university, where you've got to study. You're getting paid above what an average factory worker would earn in China. I was in China 6 months ago. I'm in China next month. I can tell you, you walk through these factories, the average wage is 800 to 1,000 US dollars per month. We simply cannot compete from that at that level. The next layer is going to be energy costs. We can't compete with China on energy costs. Their energy costs are half what our energy costs are, and in a lot of places, it's subsidized even more than half. So if you're talking about your two biggest input costs being labor and energy, we're nowhere near in the realms of competing with them. Defense is a bit of a different industry. It's as we've already discussed, you need sovereign capacity. You need the government to spend and pay more for stuff to be built in Australia. It's a non-negotiable. High-paying jobs, highly skilled jobs, high taxes back into the Australian economy. This this is the future made in Australia. These are the industries that we need to be bolstering. Increasing defence spending to 3% and building largely capabilities onshore, that's an investment in Australian training. That's an investment in Australian jobs and in Australian manufacturing. And of course, it helps support the ADF. So I think it's good for all Australians that this ecosystem is built within our country as much as possible.
I couldn't agree with you more. But of course, defense industry has its own set of problems, and I'm referring here to the relations between prime companies, most of which are obviously foreign based, and local SMEs, small to medium enterprises. Now, we know that in our defense industry ecosystem, it's at the small to medium enterprise level that you find a lot of the local indigenous innovation.
Mm.
Often these startups get bought out by the prime company, the foreign prime company, which then leads to issues of who owns what IP. And then if we're talking about, the relations that we have with the United States, and, you made mention that, it'd be great if we could actually start manufacturing Tomahawk cruise missiles, which I totally agree with you, but you and I both know, would the Americans let us? Because, they protect their IP with a vengeance, and I don't think that they'd want to have a second or third party get access to the inner workings of, one of their key capabilities, even for a good little ally like Australia. So, we've got a couple of problems here. How would you think that we be best kitted out to solve them? Can we grow an SME to become a local prime company to get people to start manufacturing more onshore products across a broader variety of defense items?
I would say we need to pick our lanes as to what we're going to focus on. I don't think we can be all things to all countries. Quite simply, we just don't have the manpower in this country to spread ourselves so thinly across the board that I do think it's possible for these SMEs to grow and scale, but invariably, yeah, you are correct. Someone like a Lockheed Martin or a Northrop Grumman or a Boeing will see this local development, and naturally that is the power of the US beast and why
Yeah.
we should maintain our relationship with them, because at the end of the day we are in a capitalist system, and if you've founded a business and someone is willing to pay you hundreds of millions or billions of dollars for that business, invariably at some point someone's going to say, "Oh, yep, I'm ready to cash my chips in," and we can't begrudge people for that. We can only work with the system. But I will give you an example because you mentioned, um, can we get tomahawks manufactured here? I think it starts with the political will to be able to go out and ask for it. And if I go back to when Scott Morrison was Prime Minister, he had an idea. He said, "Hey, we want the best nuclear submarines in the world, and how do we get them?" He went to the US president at the time and said, "I've got an idea. Australia, we love each other. We've been in every single war with each other." He put a case forward as to why they should sell us their most sensitive technology, the apex predator of the oceans. Anyone would have told you there's no chance the US would agree to that. There is no chance. Uh, it needs to come at the very top brass. I guarantee you, if Albanese went to President Trump and said, "Hey, here's my plan. In the event of a conflict in the Asia Pacific, we need to be able to produce Tomahawk missiles because we can't rely just on you to supply them. You need to diversify your base and have a sovereign capability in Australia to be able to produce Tomahawk missiles. I am willing to put X billion dollars behind this project. Will you support it?" I would almost guarantee that President Trump would say, finally, someone's thinking the way I'm thinking, and he would see it as a further hedge against China. It just needs to come from the top. It's not going to come from the bureaucracy. It's not going to come from a general suggesting it. You need the leader of this country to put that case forward and to persecute it and to say this is what to be convincing. They need to be a salesman. They need to say, hey, this makes a lot of sense. Trump is all about deals. You need to make a deal with him. I've got no doubt that we could unlock things like the B-21 Raider as well if we just put forward the case and backed it up with spending. He would. I guarantee it. If there was the conviction there to go and do it, we would get what we want.
It all comes down to politics in the end, doesn't it?
Well, they're the ones that sign the checks, right? And it's easier for them to come up with a couple $1 billion. Not so easy for a general to say, yeah, this is
Yeah.
what we're going to do.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, let's switch to AUKUS now. AUKUS is the biggest industrial and strategic undertaking in our history, but the public debate has been kind of on again, off again, which erodes confidence. Um, Australia announced a $3.9 billion investment to progress the Osborne nuclear sub shipyard here in South Australia, described as a down payment with total build projections around the $30 billion mark over coming decades. Australia is also making scheduled payments to support the US submarine industrial base. Reuters reported a $500 million payment in early 2025 and a second $525 million payment in mid 2025. Australia's own submarine agency states the UK intends to begin building its first SSN AUKUS as early as the late 2020s and deliver the first to the Royal Navy in the late 2030s. How hard is it, Mel, in practical terms, for US yards to increase Virginia class output while meeting US Navy requirements? Because we do know that there are some significant output problems in US shipyards today.
It's definitely a massive structural problem. They're not producing enough for their own, and I believe it's the first two subs that we're getting are going to be, of course, refurbished secondhand ones from the US, which is probably quite telling in itself that they're giving us some of their existing stock base first. I believe it's in the early 2030s. So of course it's going to have huge delays and issues. We know that about every single major project anyway. So I think if you'd be naive to think that there weren't going to be delays with a lot of these projects. In relation to the upgrade of the two naval bases here in Australia, um, all of that spending is, of course, massive infrastructure spend for Australian jobs, particularly in construction, which, of course, any kind of infrastructure build out in this country, I think, is good things. Um, the strategic importance of both South Australia and WA isn't lost on the Americans either. There are plenty of US generals that are huge advocates for uh, uh, Australia doing this as well as America supporting it. There's been an increased marine rotation to somewhere like Darwin. Um, Everyone's identified that this part of the world is becoming more strategically important for places like America, particularly in the event that Guam is the one of the first, um, potentially one of the first places to be attacked in any conflict in Asia Pacific, and therefore, what are the alternatives for America? Pull back to Hawaii, simply quite too far away. Sterling, in particular, makes huge strategic sense for the Americans.
All right, Mel. On the UK side, the Barrow shipyards are struggling with the Astute run out, the Dreadnought build. Can the UK ramp for SSN AUKUS on schedule, or does Australia end up having to pay to expand UK capacity too?
I would say that we probably want to focus more on US industrial capacity. I don't think that we can continue to hedge all partners within AUKUS. Look, I think this is just a symptom of the developed world, right? Um, not just America and the UK, but Australia. Our industrial base for manufacturing has just completely eroded. Same reason why we're getting the Megami built, or at least the first couple in Japan. Uh, none of our countries really want to make things anymore. This is a big ship to turn, so to speak. Uh, I don't feel like Australia is ready to pivot enough. I feel like America is doing it. I don't feel like the UK is going to be anywhere near the industrial power that it needs to be to supply us. Certainly, the framework is in America is more pro business, more pro building things again. So I think that's just going to be our greatest hedge, unfortunately.
So, okay, if timelines slip because of this very fact, one member of AUKUS just can't deliver, what's Australia's bridging strategy?
Oh, we're already committed to getting two existing Virginia class subs.
Mm,
I think having the bases in particularly, as I said, Sterling in WA, will naturally just will leverage the existing force that the US has got of submarines, and likely, I would say there would be an increase in deployments in our region in order to be able to block the two straits I mentioned, the Malacca and the Sunda Strait. Um,
mm.
it would just simply mean that we will have to leverage more of the US's assets, which I would say that they would highly be likely to do anyway. But you and I as Australians, there's a certain level of pride that we have in that we want to be able to look after ourselves, certainly as much as possible, and go one better. And we're known for punching above our weight, and to be reliant on an ally like America to do the heavy lifting for us. I mean that sort of strikes a bit of a note in me to say, hang on a minute, why aren't we doing enough? Why aren't we ramping up? It feels very un-Australian to be a leaner and lean on someone else to do the heavy lifting for you. I think we need to get back to punching above our weight.
Yep, yep, I totally agree with that. And mind you, in the current Trumpian situation, you don't want to be having the tag free rider on your back, right? That's
No,
another,
no,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
It's just not a great feeling, right? Like
no,
we
correct.
want to we want to be able to say we're doing more than our fair share. That's the
Yeah,
Australian way.
yeah, exactly. Reserves across all services, um, they're not just ceremonial adjuncts, but they're meant to serve as surge capacity, like Army Reserves, Air Force Reserves, Navy Reserves. The stated aim is integration into a total workforce model, but integration must mean operational readiness, not just impressive administrative paperwork. Mel, if mobilisation were required, how quickly could the ADF generate additional deployable capability across all services? Have the reserve reforms truly closed the seam between part-time and full-time service?
I would say it would probably depend on the context of the war in which we are in and how strongly Australia felt that, or Australians in general felt that we need to contribute. Um, quite clearly, if China attacked Taiwan, and this is a free democracy that shares a lot of our values, I think there would be a huge surge in defence recruitment. I think that quite clearly the ADF would also ramp up its advertising spend. I remember I used to always see ADF advertising to join the reserves, join the army, the air force, the navy. I barely see any of those, and you think that uh, I've reached out to all pillars. Do any of them want to come on this channel and talk about defence recruitment? Do they want to address some of the concerns? Do they want to express where the opportunities are? The answer is no. You get crickets from them. They've been completely shut off from the rest of the world. If you look at similar YouTubers in America, they are opening up the bases. They are letting the YouTubers ride in tanks to inspect aircraft. We just don't have that level of access here in Australia, and I feel like quite generally the government hasn't been motivated to do that. That would change in a wartime scenario, though. I do think that desperate times call for desperate measures. So
Mm.
I do feel that in the event of a conflict, it would massively ramp up. Um, but in the current state of play, I just don't think it's a huge priority for any administration. There was an idea that I've been pitching for a while to try and get early school leavers interested in the ADF. I think there needs to be some kind of bridging program where, maybe if you finish, year 12 and you're not sure what you want to do, maybe you just go do a 3-month stint in the ADF in between potentially starting further studies or, whether that's university or TAFE. But I felt like a school leaver program where you say, okay, we'll go and do a 3-month basic training course for your troubles. We'll give you, 15 or 20 grand or something like that. Give young people a strong incentive to want to go and give it a go and be handsomely rewarded for it. And I think you would get a fair chunk of those people decide, yeah, this might be a career for me, or I might just join the reserves so that I can keep my training up, over the years and whatnot. But there just hasn't been that political willpower to address it as a key issue. Um, Quite simply, a policy needs to support both the ADF and the reservists.
Yeah, look, obviously that has to be fixed because, without personnel, it's interesting. We tend to, when we talk about defense, we focus on all the sexy weapons. Oh yeah, look at that stealth fighter. Oh, doesn't that look like a beauty? But no one really talks about, well, what about the air crew managing it? Do we have enough people to actually service the bloody thing? And and by the way, how many pilots do we actually have that we can actually fly this thing in a manner that would be befitting of your national security interests? Um, so, with regard to personnel, if we go back to the reserves, what I really want to find out is that whole total workforce situation that Canberra's been, talking about. I mean, are we seeing better integrative mechanisms between the reserves and regular forces, or is that still stuck in that administrative, let's write a white paper kind of situation? What are we seeing with that? Because there was a time when, during our Ramsey mission in the Solomon Islands, and even the Interfet with East Timor, the reserves really were fleshing out hollow regular units in a way that we hadn't seen before, and it was very, very good. But it seems that the government has dropped that. Are we seeing signs that maybe there's going to be a change here, or there has been a change that's just gone unnoticed?
I don't think there's been any change. If anything, it's been bogged down in like a lot of areas of government, bureaucratic process. I've had plenty of
Yeah.
people stop me in the street, say, I just stopped applying because it was too hard. People didn't get back to me. There was no follow-up. I don't think there's a shortage of people wanting to sign up. I think the issue is the bureaucracy, for whatever reason, is taking too long to process people. Perhaps the selection criteria hasn't been reviewed in a long time and is getting further bogged down in delays. I probably couldn't say this is the reason. It's probably lots of little reasons as to why it's not happening. But from my channel, people have stopped me on the street, quite regularly, and some people have said I'd signed up because I was interested in some of the stuff that you were talking about. And then
Brilliant.
there's been also plenty of people that have said I signed up or I tried to sign up, and for whatever reason I wasn't allowed to. And
Mm.
so I think these people are just getting caught in a web, particularly when the processing time, takes too long. I mean, if you're hungry to get in, Like you want it now. You want to know. You want an answer. You don't want to be left in limbo for 12 months waiting for an answer, because chances are by then you've probably moved on to the next thing and decided to do something else instead. People have probably got, a span of about 3 months that there probably just needs to be a processing period and a definitive date as to how long the government has got to process you. But it wouldn't shock me that, like most things, there's been more bureaucrats put on, which means more process and paperwork, which means less answers and longer delays. So I think it just needs a wholesale tidy up as to uh, what a general process period looks like for someone applying.
Well, Mel, that's a wrap. Thanks for being with us on The Focus and for sharing your insights.
Thanks, John. Great to be with you and appreciated the chat as well.
Let me draw this together. Do we in Australia have a coherent warfighting system? Deterrence is not a platform, it's alignment. Alignment between ships, aircraft, armoured vehicles, artillery, munitions, shipyards, factories, and the people who operate them. For instance, a navy in transition is survivable, a nation without sustainment is not. If we fail to align platforms, personnel, and production capacity across all three services, we risk becoming a technologically impressive force with structural frailty. Deterrence is a system. Ships, magazines, shipyards, defence manufacturing centres, soldiers, aircraft, and the people who sustain them. It's not a press release. Now on to questions for the audience. If Australia faced a prolonged regional crisis, do you believe the ADF currently has the personnel depth and the industrial sustainment to endure beyond the initial phase? Should Australia prioritise more platforms or deeper domestic production of munitions, spares, and sustainment across all services? Do you believe the reserves are truly integrated into the regular ADF, or are they still a latent capability that would take too long to mobilise? Let us know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's a free way to support us. You can also subscribe to the podcast on the Ozcast network, iTunes, and Spotify, where we'd appreciate your 5-star reviews. Do you have comments or questions about the podcast? Post them in the comments section on YouTube, and I'll do my best to respond to as many as I can. My thanks as ever to the producers of The Focus, Neil Smart and Lynn Sear. Please stay connected with us on social media. Follow me on X at BruniDoctor and follow The Focus on X at TheFocus_Sage. And don't forget Blue Sky on The Focus pod adl.bsky.social. From Adelaide, South Australia, you've been listening to The Focus.